When you step into a doctor's office in a foreign country, um, you aren't just a patient seeking care. You're actually stepping into this highly regulated, really high stakes linguistic dance.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a daunting reality, honestly.
Yeah, and if you miss a single step, I mean, you might literally walk out the door with the wrong medication, which is exactly what we're diving into today.
Right, because when you are operating in a second language, the margin for error feels incredibly slim,
Yeah.
especially when it's your health on the line.
Exactly. Which is why today's deep dive is going to be extremely practical. Because getting sick in a language that isn't your native tongue, it's not just like, solving a complex puzzle.
No, it's much more rigid than that.
Right. It is much more like trying to input code into an old legacy computer system. If you
Yeah.
don't use the exact syntax, like the correct combination of symptoms, the specific duration, the precise personal information, the system just throws an error message.
It completely stalls out.
Yeah, and you don't get the help you need.
That is such a perfect way to look at it. And today's deep dive is all about cracking that specific code.
Right.
We are looking at a real-world scenario from our source material featuring two friends, David and Emma. David has woken up sick, and Emma is helping him navigate a trip to the clinic. And what we're going to do is analyze the entire structure of this medical care communication, literally from the moment David realizes he needs help all the way to the moment he is ready to walk into the pharmacy.
Right. So the mission for this deep dive is to extract those essential, practical English phrases you actually need to survive this system. We are going to build a reliable mental script for you, the listener. So if you ever find yourself in David's shoes, you won't panic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You will know exactly how to interface with the medical system.
Yeah.
Because, when your throat feels like sandpaper and your head is just pounding,
Oh, the worst.
right, your cognitive function just plummets. You
Yeah.
do not have the energy to translate complex medical jargon in your head
No, not at all.
or search for the right vocabulary. You really just need a reflex.
Okay, so let's unpack this by starting at the very beginning. We are at David's house. He is waking up, and he knows immediately that something is wrong.
Mhm.
The source material gives us his first interaction with his friend Emma, and it's a perfectly constructed way to announce an illness. He doesn't groan, he doesn't use dramatic language. He simply says, "I don't feel very well today."
Yeah, and what's fascinating there is the social utility of that specific phrase, "I don't feel very well today," acts as this universal conversational buffer.
A buffer. How so?
Well, it softens the blow for the listener, right?
Yeah.
But it clearly flags a shift in your baseline health. It is essentially the polite warning shot before you deliver the actual bad news.
Okay, but wait, I'm a little stuck on why we even need to soften the blow. Like if I am sick, why can't I just say I'm sick or I caught a disease? Why do we use this slightly vague, not feeling well phrasing in English?
I mean, it really comes down to cultural norms around stoicism and also scaling the severity of an issue.
Oh,
If you immediately say, "I am sick," it can sound alarming, like it's a severe long-term condition. But saying, "I don't feel very well,"
it's more temporary.
exactly. It gives you the space to escalate the conversation naturally. It invites the other person to ask follow-up questions, which, is exactly what Emma does.
Right, so she asks what's wrong, and David follows up with a conversational skeleton key that every listener should literally have locked in their memory right now.
Yes, this part is crucial.
He lists his symptoms by saying, "I have a sore throat, a headache, and I think I have a fever." Let me repeat that for you guys listening. I have a sore throat, a headache, and I think I have a fever. He anchors everything with the verb have.
Right.
He doesn't say my throat is sore or my headaches. He uses I have to possess the symptoms.
And using "I have" plus the symptom, that is the absolute standard in English medical communication. It just packages the information cleanly.
It's so efficient.
It is. And notice the strategic decision they make immediately after he lists those symptoms. Emma suggests seeing a doctor, and David replies, "Let's leave now before the clinic gets busy."
Oh, timing is everything in medical systems. You definitely want to beat the rush.
Definitely. But before they even make it to the car, Emma runs through a critical checklist. She tells him, "Don't forget your phone, wallet, and health card."
The holy trinity of running errands.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that trio: phone, wallet, health card is the universal hardware required to access medical care in almost any English-speaking environment.
Right, because you need the phone to follow up or book things.
Yeah, you need a way to pay for services or medication with the wallet, and obviously you need medical identification to prove you are part of the system.
Right, Without those three items, the bureaucratic machinery of the clinic just grinds to a halt before you even see a doctor.
Exactly. You're stuck.
I see the logistical necessity there, absolutely. But looking at this phase of their morning, I'm honestly struck by the sheer value of Emma's presence.
Oh, the friendship dynamic here is massive.
Yeah. I mean, David feels terrible. He admits he doesn't feel well enough to drive, and Emma just instantly takes over. She
Hmm.
drives. She tells him to fasten his seatbelt. They have this 15-minute drive where David is just stewing in his own anxiety.
Which is so common when you're sick.
Right. He's worrying about traffic, worrying about his headache, and Emma is just managing the entire environment for him.
It highlights a really crucial truth, honestly. Navigating illness is rarely a solo endeavor. Emotional support is often the very first step in medical care, long before a doctor is even involved. Emma is performing what psychologists actually call cognitive offloading for David.
Wait, cognitive offloading, meaning she is doing the thinking so he doesn't have to.
Precisely. Because she tells him, try to relax and drink some water.
Ugh.
And then she grounds him by outlining the exact sequence of events in their near future. She says, the doctor will examine you and find out what's wrong.
That's so reassuring.
It is. Because when you are sick and vulnerable, the unknown is terrifying. Having a trusted person simply state the plan out loud, it completely removes the fear of the unknown.
It definitely works because David explicitly says that makes him feel better. So, okay, they manage the anxiety of the car ride, they arrive at the clinic, but walking through those sliding glass doors introduces a completely different type of stressor.
Oh, the reception desk.
Yes. You are no longer talking to a caring friend.
Mhm.
You are facing the bureaucratic gatekeeper.
The logistics phase. This is where the linguistic code we talked about earlier becomes absolutely non-negotiable.
Okay, let's actually look at the exact exchange between David and the receptionist here, because to me it reads like a rigid, almost theatrical script.
It really does.
So David walks up to the glass and says, "Good morning, I'd like to see the doctor." And the receptionist replies, "Good morning, how can I help you? Do you have an appointment?"
Hmm.
And David says, "Yes, I do. My appointment is at 10:30.
Right, and that right there is an immediate algorithmic verification of status. The receptionist is literally sorting David into a specific operational track.
Okay, but I have to push back on the language here, though.
Okay, sure.
I'm looking at this dialogue, and the contrast is just jarring. Like, in the car, David and Emma were speaking so casually, but the moment he hits the desk, it's incredibly formal. "I'd like to see the doctor."
Yeah.
And then the receptionist asks, "May I have your name, please?" Why does everyone suddenly sound like they're in a Victorian novel just to check in for a sore throat?
I know, it's a jarring shift.
Yeah.
But it actually serves a very specific structural purpose. In English medical settings, the receptionist is the first line of defense for a highly regulated, legally sensitive environment.
Okay.
The formal phrasing isn't just about politeness. It acts as a liability shield and a tool for professional distance.
Oh, wow. So they aren't just being nice. They are literally processing data.
Exactly. When the receptionist says, "May I have your name, please?" Instead of casually asking, "Who are you?"
Mm-hmm.
They are signaling that you are entering a formal contract of care. They are standardizing the intake of critical information.
So they are slotting David into a specific legally binding database.
Literally, yeah.
Okay, well, that reframes the entire interaction for me. So David gives his name, David Brown, and then he receives the final instruction of the intake process. "Please have a seat. The doctor will call you soon."
And once you hear, "Please have a seat," you know your data has been successfully inputted. The system has accepted you.
That's such a relief. So if you are listening to this, mastering that specific sequence at the reception desk is your golden ticket.
Definitely.
Let me recap it. You state your intent, "I'd like to see the doctor." You confirm your slot, "I have an appointment." You provide your identifier, your name, and you wait for the system to process you. "Please have a seat." Once you bypass that firewall, you are finally in the inner sanctum.
Which brings us to the climax of the deep dive. The doctor's office.
Yes. David's name is called. He walks in, sits on that uncomfortable crinkly paper on the exam table, and the doctor uses a very specific opening prompt. The doctor says, "Good morning. What brings you in today?"
And what brings you in today is arguably the most common, classic, open-ended medical greeting in the English language. Notice that they rarely ask, "What is your disease?" or "Why are you sick?"
It actually sounds almost folksy, like a bartender asking what you want to drink or something.
Yeah.
But considering what we just discussed about formal language at the reception desk, I assume this casual prompt is actually demanding a very technical answer.
It is. It's intentionally open-ended to allow the patient to prioritize their complaints. And David's response here is just a masterclass in medical communication.
It really is.
He doesn't just dump a disorganized list of symptoms on the doctor. He provides a highly structured diagnostic package.
Let's look closely at what he says in the source material. David says, I've had a sore throat, a headache, and a fever since yesterday. Let me repeat that. I've had a sore throat, a headache, and a fever since yesterday.
Right. And that structure is vital. He gives the what's the symptoms, but more importantly, he gives the how long.
Wait, I want to challenge this because I think a lot of non-native speakers get tripped up right here.
Oh, absolutely.
Why can't I just tell the doctor I got sick yesterday with a fever and a headache? Why is the grammar of using since yesterday so crucial? Is it really going to change the medical outcome?
It absolutely can change the medical outcome.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The medical triage system relies heavily on the syntax of duration. When you use the word since, you are drawing a continuous unbroken timeline from the onset of the symptom directly to the present moment.
Okay.
If a patient says they had a fever yesterday, it might imply the fever is gone today. Saying, I have had a fever since yesterday, tells the doctor this is an active, escalating situation.
Oh, I see. It frames the trajectory of the illness.
Exactly. And furthermore, duration separates entirely different categories of illness. The diagnostic path for a sore throat that has lasted since yesterday usually points to a viral infection. But a sore throat that has lasted since last month,
That's completely different.
right, that triggers alarm bells for entirely different, potentially chronic or bacterial conditions.
So by using symptom plus since plus time frame, David is actually doing half the diagnostic work for the doctor. He is narrowing the field.
He is, and you can see the doctor instantly utilize that narrowed field. Based on that package of information, the doctor asks a targeted follow-up question.
Right, the doctor asks, have you been coughing?
Yes. And David answers, yes, a little. The doctor is essentially running down a mental checklist, ruling out respiratory complications step by step.
Which leads right into the physical examination sequence. And the source material captures a really interesting nuance here. Before doing anything, the doctor narrates their own actions. The doctor says, let me check your temperature.
Yeah, and this is a foundational element of bedside manner and medical ethics in English-speaking healthcare. Medical professionals are trained to announce what they're going to do before they physically touch a patient.
Ah, that makes sense.
It maintains ongoing consent,
Yeah.
and it significantly reduces patient anxiety.
So true. Then comes the classic physical prompt we have all experienced. Please open your mouth and say, ah.
Super common.
David does so, and the doctor observes, your throat is a little red. But looking at the transcript of this interaction, I am struck by the sheer velocity of this process.
It's just fast.
It's incredibly fast. We went from good morning to say ah to analyzing a red throat in perhaps 45 seconds. For a patient, especially one operating in a second language, that speed is overwhelming. It feels like you were losing control of the situation.
Which is why David's next move is so important. He recognizes the speed of the interaction, and he literally intervenes to manage his own vulnerability.
He interrupts the flow with a very direct question. He asks, is it serious? And I think it is such a brave, necessary question, because at the end of the day, when you are sitting in that room, you don't care about the Latin name for your illness. You just want to know if you are in danger.
Exactly. Taking agency in a medical setting is difficult, but asking, is it serious, forces the doctor to pause their clinical algorithm and actually address the human fear in the room.
That's a great point.
And this question transitions us perfectly into the final phase of the visit, the diagnosis and the medical advice.
Right. So the doctor immediately de-escalates the situation. The response is, no, I think it's a viral infection. The relief David must have felt in that moment. I mean, a viral infection just means his body needs time to fight it off.
Yeah, nothing life-threatening. And the doctor then delivers the standard triad of medical advice for managing a viral infection. It is a 3-part prescription for recovery.
What are the 3 parts?
You should get plenty of rest, drink lots of water, and take this medicine. So rest, hydration, medication.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. Up to this point in the narrative, David has mostly been answering questions and following physical instructions. But when the doctor says, take this medicine, David anticipates the next logistical hurdle. He knows he has to deal with the pharmacy. So right there in the clinic, he asks, how often should I take it?
And this raises a really important question about how we interact with healthcare providers. Why shouldn't David just wait and ask the pharmacist how to take the medicine?
That was my exact thought. The pharmacy puts the instructions right there on the bottle. Why bother the doctor with it?
Because the doctor's office is your primary safety net. You never want to leave the prescribing authority without knowing the exact parameters of your treatment. If the pharmacist makes a mistake on the label, or if there is a miscommunication at the pharmacy counter, which happens, having heard the instructions directly from the doctor first, is your cross-reference, you are protecting yourself against systemic errors.
That is incredibly smart. He is essentially double-checking the code before it gets sent to the pharmacy.
Exactly.
And the doctor gives him a very specific string of data. The doctor says, twice a day after meals for 5 days.
For anyone learning English, this is the exact syntax you need to master for medication management. It contains 3 distinct, non-negotiable variables.
Let's break those down.
Okay, first, you have the frequency, twice a day. Second, the condition, after meals. And third, the duration, for 5 days. So frequency, condition, duration.
You have to memorize that rhythm. Listeners, write this down. Frequency, condition, duration. Because when you are standing under the fluorescent lights of a pharmacy, feeling terrible and literally just wanting to crawl into bed, you need to be able to verify those 3 variables.
Well, you really do.
Because if you miss the condition, like after meals, and you take the medicine on an empty stomach, you could end up with severe nausea on top of your fever. Or if you miss the duration for 5 days and stop taking it on day 3 just because you feel better, the infection might rebound. David, asking that clarifying question, ensures he has the complete architectural plan for his recovery before he even opens the office door to leave.
It perfectly completes the clinical loop. And from there, we move to the final scene of our source material, where David leaves the exam room and finds Emma waiting for him.
The advocate resumes her role.
She does. Emma asks, How did it go? And David is now able to summarize his own health status perfectly. He tells her, the doctor said I just need some rest and medicine.
They agree to stop by the pharmacy on the way home, which closes the logistical loop of the entire journey. But Emma's final line really ties a bow on the narrative.
It really does.
David thanks her for coming with him and dealing with the driving and the waiting, and Emma simply replies, anytime. Friends and family are always here to help.
It is a heartwarming conclusion, for sure, but it also reinforces the underlying theme we've been tracking this entire time.
Yeah.
A medical system is a cold, algorithmic bureaucracy. Navigating it requires immense cognitive load. Having a support system to absorb some of that load is a profound advantage.
So if we look back at the journey we've just charted, we have successfully extracted the essential code. We went from recognizing symptoms at the house to securing a logistical support system to bypassing the formal gatekeeper at reception to using the precise symptom plus since formula to help the doctor triage. And finally, locking down the frequency, condition, and duration of the medication. You, the listener, now possess the complete step-by-step English script for surviving a doctor's visit.
So what does this all mean? Why did we spend this deep dive dissecting the linguistics of a standard medical appointment?
Right, what's the big takeaway?
It means that predictability is your absolute best defense against panic.
Oh, I like that.
When you understand the underlying structure, when you know that the stiff language at reception is just a database algorithm, when you understand the diagnostic power of the word since, when you know to demand your medication parameters, you remove the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
Having this script removes the massive cognitive load of trying to translate your pain into a foreign system. It allows you to focus your limited energy on what actually matters.
Yeah.
Advocating for yourself and simply getting better.
It turns a terrifying puzzle into a manageable checklist. Honestly, it's so empowering. But, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder as we wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
We just spent all this time analyzing the very specific, highly structured English vocabulary required for a doctor's visit. But think about the underlying mechanics of what we just explored.
Right.
The careful, liability-driven questioning at the reception desk, the sequence of the physical check, the strict parameters of frequency and duration for taking medicine, even the quiet presence of a worried friend in the waiting room.
Yeah, it's a universal sequence.
Exactly. This entire choreography of vulnerability, triage, and treatment is virtually identical across cultures and borders, regardless of the words being spoken. It makes you wonder, is the structure of illness, like the human rhythm of seeking help and offering care, actually the most universal language we have?
Wow, that is a profound way to look at it. The vocabulary changes depending on where you are in the world, of course. But the human experience of needing care and the systematic way we try to provide it remains exactly the same.
It really does. Well, until next time, stay curious, stay healthy, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.